Yeah, so first I wanted to thank Margarita, John, Anne, and Alice, and all of you who have put this event together for your work and for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be with you. I just wish I was there in person. And yes, it's a pleasure to share parts of my work on weaponized sound with you today, and in particular about acoustic hailing devices, which is the focus of my talk today. So many of you probably know the Long-Range Acoustic Device, or LRAD, which is the name of the acoustic hailers by the company GNSS, the ones that are more broadly utilized by police and the military worldwide. So between shouting and shooting is the catchphrase, the repeated motto used by proponents and users of non-lethal weapons, also called less lethal weapons, in the government, in military and law enforcement agencies. That in between is where all the repertoire of non-lethal weapons, from old school batons and tear gas to active denial systems and tasers are supposed to be. The non-lethal military and law enforcement programs that have exponentially sprung in the US and in Europe during the 21st century are rhetorically predicated on the need to fill that gap. Acoustic hailing devices are one of such tools. Roughly, we could think of them as specialized loudspeakers. AHDs are high-intensity directional sound systems that produce narrow sound beams with high pressure sound level that can be targeted to particular locations. The beam width can range from 10 to 60 degrees for different models, and other models have an adjustable width so that this can target individuals, small groups, or large crowds on the spot. AHDs have two modes. They can work as a directional, powerful speaker optimized to transmit clear voice commands in excess of 500 meters, and for the most powerful models, over 5 kilometers, and it generates a scalable attention-getting and highly irritating deterrent tone for behavior modification up to 160 decibels. These are respectively called voice and alert tone. AHDs are framed as high-tech 21st century counterparts to bullhorns. Because the character of their sound projections, they are also known as sound cannons. In the market since 2003, AHDs were initially conceived as military solutions, as audio-technical responses to the unconventional and pervasive threats and operations the US military was invested in at the turn of the century. In particular, the US Department of Defense classifies them as versatile, counterpersonal, non-lethal weapons designed to deny access, to move, and to suppress individuals that can come in handy in a range of operations, from checkpoints to crowd control. Today, the AHD family of devices and industry has expanded and diversified. AHDs can be handheld and portable, large and fixed, remote control and mounted in drones or integrated with surveillance networks. They are marketed for a plethora of civil and defense, public and private security applications alike. Along with the military, law enforcement was an early adopter and is one of the main users of AHDs. Indeed, AHDs are infamous because of their service as a crowd control policing tool. From Santiago de Chile to Tbilisi, police agencies have deployed LRADs, the product name of the AHDs manufactured by GNSS, against protesters. In the United States, for instance, LRADs were utilized against the Standing Rock water protectors and are pervasively utilized against Black Lives Matter protesters as part of militarized and racialized police responses. So I'm going to show you a brief fragment of a video taken of the use of the LRAD against protesters in Baton Rouge in Louisiana in the summer of 2016, following the killing of Alton Sterling by 2 Baton Rouge police officers. Sorry. Because AHDs sound beams can and do cause hearing damage, as well as other forms of physiological and psychic trauma, they are contested. Human rights organizations, activists, lawyers, and other cultural workers denounce LRAD's use as a dangerous form of violence, and usually target the deterrent tone. The sellers and police users of the device, though, insist that it is not a weapon but a communication device, that if properly used, it is safe and more humane than rubber bullets or tear gas, even though in practice, LRADs often work alongside and not at the expense of those other non-lethal capabilities, as was the case in Baton Rouge, in Ferguson, in New York, or in Barcelona. The lawyers defending the New York Police Department use of LRADs in the case Elena Cohen litigated and in which I collaborated displayed a series of commonsensical fallacies that are core to the slipperies of sound violence and of the LRAD in particular. The first one had to do with what we could call the immateriality of sound. They say that sound is not a substance and therefore it cannot touch you. Then, again, there was this division between communication and violence, which was followed by a framing of weaponized sound as always already a lesser human violence. It is worth noting that defenders and detractors of AHDs alike usually rely on, to use Eyal Weizman's expression, the lesser evil logic, the same logic that animates and justifies non-lethal weaponry at large. Both parties, too, tend to sustain the division between loud speaking and assaulting, between communication and violence. Some say that the LRAD is more like shouting, the others that it is more like shooting. A different, and to me, more perverse truism had to do with the neutrality of the device. Making a claim against an inanimate object is, the NYPD argued, bizarre. There is a fundamental difference between the LRAD and forms of sound-based violence, such as the CIA music tortures or sonic boom air raids, the use of military jets' sonic booms to terrorize civilians. The last two rely on creatively redressing existing technologies and the sound emissions this produce. Neither the loudspeakers nor fighter jets are created or optimized for those uses. The LRAD, though, is a technical object. It is expressly intended to fill the gaps. The purveyors of AHDs present their products as problem solvers or as gap fillers. Yet, as with all media, AHDs are neither neutral nor transparent to the intentions of their use. They are, to paraphrase Caroline Bassett, thoroughly ideological, and they shield their own sonic operations. AHDs, I propose, target and recruit auditors as both risks and at risk, as problems to manage. They do so with an ambivalence that is, in part, ingrained in technologies that shoot far-reaching, bioacoustically compelling voice commands and warnings. AHDs are not just loud. They are designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of the human auditory system, to boost output and directivity over the range where it is more sensitive. The ear's vulnerabilities are further recruited in built-in tones designed to engage the auditory system in a very effective manner. Jonathan Stern has suggested that sound technologies contain a, quote, model or script for hearing and an imagined ideal auditor, end quote. In the case of AHDs, the auditor is conceived as vulnerable and unskilled by virtue of having an eardrum. AHDs broadcasts are designed to hit a raw nerve and for speech to be intelligible both in the short and in the long ranges and under noisy conditions. To borrow a couple of their slogans, AHDs offer sound that moves and intelligible solutions with the message matters. The design of the LRAD incorporates and preys on knowledge and assumptions about the mechanics of the human body. In that, it recalls a mosquito, an anti-loitering device, a consumer-grade acoustic deterrent popular in the UK, but also used in the United States that, via frequencies, targets the young. As distinct from the mosquito, the LRAD promises universal, unmistakable messages and tones. The LRAD aims at a sort of indiscrimination wherein, although it is assumed that any person would be affected by and would get the warning tone, the voice directions, or the overall high intensity of the acoustic emission, Its detectivity allows to target the beam in space, to direct it to target auditors, while reducing the risk of exposing personnel or bystanders to excessive audio levels. The purveyors and users of LRADs, much as those of tasers, tend to only consider an able-bodied, usually male, healthy adult. This ableism is incorporated in both design and in protocols, an ableism that, in the case of non-lethal weaponry, is particularly fucked up. The LRAD always already incorporates a predatory conception of audition that shapes, materially and figuratively, its broadcast, and that is therefore central to how these devices mediate the scenarios in which they enter. What I call ambivalence was central to the New York Police Department's first purchase of LRADs in anticipation of the 2004 National Convention of the Republican Party. The LRADs could help officers in directing crowds to safety and in reminding protesters where they are allowed to march. In this example, protesters were preempted and then framed both as a risk and as being at risk. They were understood as a threat to civil order and as potentially under threat, because calamities can happen anytime and anywhere, but particularly in high-risk metropolis, which is the rationale for the public grants used to purchase LRADs in the US to date. In either scenario, the LRAD would allow police to gain attention and compliance to clear authoritative commands. It would be an authority-endowing tool for police to manage the targeted crowd in an emergency unmistakably.
GPD says the LRAD is a game changer for communication between police and the public.
Every LRAD broadcast is clearly heard and understood over background noise.
GPD says
The title of my talk, between sounding and soothing, directly refer to the broader gap that LRADs as technologies are supposed to fill. But it is also meant to do another thing. It indexes an ambivalence and a potential spectrum that applies to many coercive renderings of sound. I will mention 3 examples. The use of extreme exposures to loud music as a form of torture that the CIA famously utilized during the War on Terror, which were considered to be a form of no-touch torture. Fighter jets, sound bombs, which is the deployment of low-altitude, high-speed flights, shockwaves, and sonic booms to terrorize civilians, or the Israel Defense Forces roof knocking, which is, in their own words, to target a building with a loud but non-lethal bomb in order to warn civilians in the building and in the surrounding area about an imminent bombardment. All 3 can be said to be both in between and to conflate sounding and soothing, and, like the LRAD, to prevaricate with the spectrum, as well as with the auditors they forcibly recruit. In addition to that, I would like to end with a couple of points that maybe we can consider in the discussion, which have to do with ways of thinking about how the LRAD discriminates in a broader sense. For all they are high-tech, for all the mystique and fascination that accompanies them, devices such as LRADs end up being used more often against the usual targets of institutional violence, lethal and otherwise. In the United States, they are used more often against people of color. Relatedly, the ableism ingrained in the design in the protocols of LRADs, which, as other non-lethal weapons, are bought with public money as tools for law enforcement to, in theory, protect citizens, or at least to warn, to communicate with, and to not kill some of them, raises questions about both the uneven distribution of violence and of safety. And that's it. Thank you so much.